The river almost took her. She didn't know she'd ever see it again. She never knew she'd ever see something like it. It was the kind of flood that silenced everything. Trees bent, roads disappeared. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath as the swollen river swallowed everything in its path. 12-year-old Maya stood barefoot at the water's edge, her feet sunk ankle-deep in mud, clutching a fraying rope she barely knew how to tie. Her village had gathered on the banks, shouting, pointing, but no one moved. No one except her. Out there, caught in a whirl of branches and rushing current, was a baby elephant, its eyes wide with terror, its trunk flailing just above the surface, like it was searching for a hand to hold. Maya didn't wait. She didn't ask for help. She tied the rope around her waist and waded in. The cold hit her like a slap, but she kept moving. Her legs trembled. Her chest tightened. The current was too strong for someone her size, but something deeper than logic, something old, pushed her forward. The calf thrashed, panicking, until its gaze found hers. It stilled for a heartbeat. She threw the rope, missed, threw again. The third time it caught around a thick root, enough for her to pull forward, enough to close the distance. She reached the calf, her fingers gripping the folds of its ear, the texture foreign and unforgettable. Villagers finally rushed forward. Arms joined hers. Together they pulled. It took 20 minutes, maybe more. When they finally got the calf to land, it collapsed beside her, exhausted, its small body heaving. Maya sat beside it, soaked and shaking, the rope still looped around her waist. For a moment it didn't move. Then slowly, it lifted its trunk and touched her knee. She would never forget that. And by the time she blinked, it had turned and wandered into the forest. Alone. She never saw it again. Until 13 years later. 13 years had passed. Maya was no longer a child nor a villager. She had built a life in the city, earned her degree in environmental science. But every time it rained, she remembered. Those eyes. That moment. That touch. When she returned to her village on assignment, to study the new wildlife corridor being developed at the forest's edge, she told herself it was just work. Her bag was filled with field sensors, notebooks, and cameras. But what she carried most was something unseen, a memory that never stopped breathing. The first week passed uneventfully. Notes, observations, coordinates, routine, until that morning. The mist was beginning to lift when she heard it. A trumpet, not loud, not panicked, deep, thoughtful, and strangely familiar. Maya rose without a word and walked. She didn't know where she was going, only that her feet knew. The dry bed of the river from years ago guided her. Every turn, every stone felt like it had been waiting. And then, she saw him, standing between the trees. Bigger now, stronger. But the way his head tilted, the crescent notch in his right ear, it was him, Talu. Maya's breath caught, her heart raced, but Talu wasn't alone. Beside him stood a younger elephant, smaller and curious. And in its trunk, something worn, something weathered by time and water. Her backpack, the one she lost that day in the river, still intact, still holding the sketch, the pressed leaf, the child's version of hope. Talu stepped forward and gently laid the bag at her feet, then waited. Not for thanks, not for recognition, just to be seen. Maya knelt, tears welling, hands trembling. This wasn't memory, this was return, but not just of body, of rhythm, of something ancient, carried through time not in language, but in gesture. Maya reached forward, her hands brushing over the rough fabric of the backpack. It was sun-bleached and torn at the edges, but unmistakably hers. Slowly, she opened the zipper. Inside, she found her old drawing, crumpled, water-stained, yet still intact. A lopsided sketch of a baby elephant, trunk raised in triumph. Beneath it, the flattened leaf she had pressed inside a notebook page 13 years ago. She looked up. Talu hadn't moved. His eyes, wiser now, weathered, watched her not with expectation, but quiet knowing. And beside him, the younger elephant mirrored his posture. Its gaze flicked between Talu and Maya with something like awareness. It shifted its weight and let out a small, uncertain trumpet, almost like a question. Maya smiled through tears. "Is this your child?" she whispered. There was no answer, but somehow there was. The bond between them, unspoken, undeniable, passed from one generation to the next. She could feel it in the way the young one stood closer now, in the way Talu's massive form remained still, like a guardian, like a bridge. Days passed, then weeks. Talu began returning to the clearing more frequently, never at the same hour, never in a pattern. But he came, and each time Maya was there, waiting, sometimes alone, sometimes with her journal, and sometimes just sitting in silence, her eyes closed, listening to the wind between the trees. The younger elephant grew bolder. It began to bring things, branches braided in loops, stones arranged in spirals, a bark fragment shaped like a crescent. Maya started bringing things too, not food, not gifts, but pieces of herself, a ribbon from her notebook, a hand-carved pendant, a drawing of the fig tree that once shaded them all. It became a rhythm, not of speech, not of ceremony, but of return and response and something else. Trust. She had once saved his life, and now he had returned, not to repay her, but to remind her that the forest remembers, that what's given without asking always finds a way back, and that some connections, especially the ones shaped by water, fear, and instinct, are too deep to name. They simply continue, like rivers beneath the ground, unseen but always flowing. Maya began marking the days by the visits. She stopped measuring time in hours and tasks. Instead, she measured it by sound. When the leaves shifted a certain way, when the birds fell quiet, when the forest breath changed. She called the place the Grove. Talu never came from the same direction twice. Sometimes he appeared from behind the southern palms, other times from the narrow ridge where the vines grew thick. But every time he arrived, he brought something. Sometimes an object, sometimes just presence, and always that silence, that grounding stillness. The young elephant, whom she began to call Nari, grew more curious with each visit. Nari would approach closer than Talu ever did, extending her trunk toward Maya's hand, brushing her shoulder, nudging her sketchbook. One day, Maya let her trunk wrap around her fingers. It was warm, textured, deliberate, not searching, not testing, just connecting. It wasn't long before the villagers began to notice. They asked questions, some wary, some awed. Maya offered little, not because she was hiding anything, but because words felt too small. What was happening wasn't a study. It was something older than her career, older than her memory, a rhythm that didn't need to be explained, only respected. She began drawing every encounter, filling entire notebooks with sketches of posture, movement, silence. No arrows, no analysis. Just observation, just presence. Then one morning, Talu didn't come, nor the next day, or the next. And yet Maya didn't worry, not in the usual sense. She waited, she listened, until one evening, just as the sun turned the leaves to fire, Nari appeared alone. Maya rose slowly. Nari stepped into the clearing, more composed than usual. She walked to the center, where Maya always sat, and lowered her trunk. In it was a bundle of long grass tied with a vine. Inside, pressed gently between two leaves, was a small, flat stone. On it, a spiral. Maya knelt and took the stone into her hands. A message, a memory, a passing. Talu was gone, not lost, not forgotten, but passed into rhythm, into grove, into legacy. And Nari had brought the message, not with sound, but with trust. And Maya, with hands trembling but heart steady, placed the stone at the base of the fig tree where it had all begun. Then she whispered, not to the air but to the earth, "Thank you," because some goodbyes don't echo. They settle and become part of everything that grows. Like roots stretching deep where no one sees. Like stories passed in silence, etched not in paper, but in behavior, in return, in the way one life folds itself around another. After Talu's passing, the grove changed, not in form, but in feeling. It became quieter, not emptier, just more watchful. The air felt thicker in the mornings, as if it remembered. The wind touched her shoulder differently. Birds lingered longer before singing, and Nari stayed. Not every day, but often enough to blur the line between wild and welcome. She no longer came alone. A younger calf began to trail behind her, small, curious, still learning how to move with balance. Maya saw it the first time from a distance. Nari paused in the clearing, the calf clinging to her side, trunk wrapped tight around her foreleg. It didn't approach, just watched. But Maya smiled. It had begun again, not in the same way, not with drama or revelation, but like all things sacred, quietly, patiently, with repetition. Maya started leaving pieces of her life behind, not as gifts, but as anchors. A scarf she wore on her first day in the forest, the worn-down pen she had used to record her first sighting of Talu, a small notebook filled with phrases she had never dared say aloud. Nari took them, one by one. Sometimes she returned them, altered. The scarf was knotted with vines, the pen buried beneath a carefully placed stone. The notebook appeared days later with a pressed flower tucked between its pages. This wasn't mimicry. This was memory, alive, breathing, shared. One afternoon, Maya brought her daughter to the grove. 5 years old, barefoot, wide-eyed. She had grown up with Talu's name like a lullaby, whispered through stories before bed. But now she walked through the clearing like she had been there before. She didn't speak, just reached for the fig tree and leaned her forehead gently against the bark. Nari approached, slow and reverent, and the child turned, not with fear, but with wonder. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Not knowledge, not history, but rhythm. Like Talu had once passed it to Nari, and Nari now passed it to her. Maya didn't interrupt. She just watched, because some legacies don't need explanation. They move on their own, like breath through leaves, like light through canopy, like Talu through them all. Not in body, not in shadow, but in the quiet courage of connection, passed like an ember between generations, steady and glowing. After that day, Maya returned to the grove less with purpose and more with presence. She didn't need to track movements or log data anymore. That part of her work, though valuable, now felt small compared to what was unfolding without script. She spent her time tending to the space, not controlling it, not shaping it, but honoring what had chosen to grow there. Fallen branches were gently moved, not removed. Stones were left where they rolled. The earth itself seemed to respond, welcoming her care with new sprigs of wildflowers, bursts of green in places that had once been dry. Nari's calf grew quickly. Maya watched it learn how to trumpet softly, how to mimic her mother's slow steps, how to pause when the wind shifted as if listening to something older than both of them. Sometimes the calf would stand just beyond the clearing's edge and stare, like it was waiting for someone to arrive, someone it had never met, but still expected. One morning, Maya found a circle of leaves arranged precisely where she used to sit. Inside it was a single white feather. She didn't know what it meant, and she didn't need to, because the grove was no longer a place of answers. It was a place of continuity. She would sometimes find villagers near the edge, watching from afar, curious, respectful. Over time, they began to leave small things too. Hand-carved trinkets, food wrapped in cloth, woven charms. Not because Maya asked them to, but because the story had begun to spread, not in headlines but in hushes, in awe. People came, not to interfere, but to remember something they didn't know they had forgotten. And Maya, she stayed. She built a small hut just beyond the tree line. Nothing modern, nothing permanent. Just enough to be close. Some nights she would sit beneath the stars with her daughter listening, not for sounds but for rhythm. And when Nari came, because she always did, Maya wouldn't speak. Her daughter wouldn't move. They would simply sit, and the clearing would breathe around them. Because some stories don't fade. They grow, like Talu through them all. The spiral on the stone wasn't just a mark. It was a memory carved into earth. One no storm could wash away, no time could wear thin. It was as if Talu's presence had taken root, not only in Maya's life, but in the very land itself. And now, through the rhythm of this place, it echoed in others. Children from the nearby villages began visiting the grove during seasonal celebrations. What once was a place known only by whispers was slowly becoming sacred ground, but not in a loud or touristic way. There were no fences, no signs, no rules. Only respect, only story. One child placed a necklace made of river stones at the base of the fig tree and whispered a name that wasn't theirs. Another tied a ribbon around a branch and said thank you, though no one had spoken to her. And Nari watched all of this with eyes that had seen more than most humans ever would. She stood at the clearing's edge like a guardian, not territorial, not distant, but present. Her calf was now growing taller, stronger, already mimicking the quiet grace of its mother. It followed behind, stepping in her footprints, pausing where she paused, listening when she listened. Maya documented less now. Her notebooks remained half-filled, their pages mostly blank. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned when not to say anything at all. She spent more time teaching her daughter how to move through the forest barefoot, how to read the tilt of a bird's wing, how to feel the vibration in the soil before footsteps were even heard. Lessons that had no tests, only echoes. And sometimes, late in the evenings, they would sit together in the fading light, hands in the grass, hearts listening. The forest wouldn't always give them a sound. Sometimes it offered only stillness. But even then, they knew. They were not alone. They were never alone. Because long ago, something had been saved, and it had returned not to be remembered, but to remember. Not with photographs or monuments, but through presence, through return, through the way footsteps softened when they reached the grove, as if every visitor knew, without being told, that this place asked for reverence, not reverie. In time, Maya stopped marking days entirely. Instead, she marked moments. The way Nari's calf, now nearly full-grown, nudged her daughter gently when they met near the fig tree, like greeting an old friend. The way the spiral stone was never in the same place twice, as if being moved by unseen hands or ancient patterns. The way sometimes, only sometimes, a distant trumpet rolled across the trees in the blue hush before dawn. Low, measured, like breath made into sound. Once her daughter asked, "Why do the elephants keep coming back here?" Maya paused, then answered carefully, "Because this place remembers who they are." "Do they remember who we are?" She smiled at that. "Only if we come with who we truly are." That night they left a sketchbook on the edge of the clearing, not filled with drawings, but with blank pages, an invitation. Days later, it was gone, and in its place was a single stick, broken neatly in half and crossed over a sprig of wild basil. A response, a conversation that needed no translation, because what had started as a rescue had become a ritual. What had once been survival had become stewardship, and what Maya had thought was a single act of courage at 12 years old was now revealed as something far greater. It was a seed, planted in flood, watered by memory, and grown into legacy. And though Talu was no longer seen, he was not gone. He was in every softened gaze, every cautious step, every calf that paused before entering the clearing, as if remembering a name never spoken aloud. And Maya knew. Some stories aren't meant to be retold. They're meant to be lived again and again by those who remember. And remembering in this place wasn't just memory, it was motion, it was instinct. It was showing up when there was no reason to, sitting in silence with nothing to ask, and still being part of the rhythm. Over time, the boundaries between Maya's world and theirs blurred even further. She stopped wearing watches. The time of day was now measured by light, the angle of sunbeams through the fig leaves, the temperature of the soil under her feet. Her phone remained shut off in a drawer, forgotten. Letters and messages from the city went unanswered, not out of neglect, but because she had nothing left to prove there. People still came, not many, but enough. They sat in circles, some of them crying and not knowing why. Others stared into the trees and whispered names of loved ones they had lost. Some came with nothing and left offerings. Others came with too much and left lighter. And the grove accepted them all, but only if they were willing to be small. The elephants sensed it too. Nari no longer hesitated when entering the clearing. She would walk the full length of it, sometimes circling the fig tree once, twice before settling under its shade. Her child, taller now than Maya, would join her in these motions, not imitating, but inheriting. Maya's daughter called these moments returns. Not visits, not sightings, returns. Because each time felt less like something new and more like something ancient, remembering its way back home. One day as dusk fell and the sky turned to deep gold, Maya sat alone under the tree. Her daughter was away with family. The grove was empty, no visitors, no elephants, just wind, branches, and her heartbeat. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the original drawing, the one from 13 years ago, faded but intact. She placed it at the base of the fig tree, along with a smooth river stone she had carried in her pocket for years. Then she said quietly, "I'm not the same girl anymore." And the forest, as always, said nothing. But the leaves rustled once, a gentle hush, as if saying, "We know." Because remembrance isn't about holding on to the past. It's about walking with it, letting it shape your steps, letting it teach the ones who come after. And Maya knew she wasn't the end of this story. She was a thread, one of many, braided into something larger, slower, and far more sacred. Years later, the grove still stood. The fig tree, older and gnarled, bore witness to seasons, to arrivals, to returns. The path leading to it was barely visible, worn not by tools or tires, but by quiet footsteps that knew where they were going. Maya had aged gently. Her hair now carried streaks of silver. Her hands, once tentative and searching, moved with the surety of someone who no longer sought answers, only presence. Her daughter had grown into a woman, and one morning, as the fog still clung to the canopy, she arrived at the grove not as a guest, but as its next guardian. Maya watched from the edge, unseen as her daughter approached the fig tree and laid something beneath it. A folded cloth, inside it a small hand-carved elephant made of driftwood. Her daughter didn't speak, didn't cry. She simply stood there, eyes closed, head slightly bowed, in rhythm with the trees. And then, out of the forest's hush, an elephant emerged. Not Nari, a new one, younger, taller, but familiar in posture, in pace. It walked straight to the girl and paused. The two stood in stillness, only the breeze passing between them. And then slowly, the elephant lowered its head. Just enough. Just like Talu had once done. Maya turned away, her chest full, her eyes soft. Because the circle was unbroken. The story had outlived its teller. And the secret the elephant had returned with all those years ago. It wasn't a message. It wasn't a mystery. It was a rhythm, a remembering, a way back to something the world had almost forgotten. That sometimes the wild doesn't need to be tamed. It only needs to be seen. If this story moves something in you, share it, carry it forward. Because some truths aren't meant to be kept. They're meant to return. Subscribe for more true-hearted stories that remind us how deeply we're all connected. And don't forget, sometimes the smallest act of kindness echoes for a lifetime.